Hello, and welcome to the seventh session of the course Basics of ALT. And with this session, we are starting the skills videos. There will be 4 videos about skills, and the first one is about teaching listening. So in this video, we'll talk about listening as a receptive skill. We'll discuss types of listening. We'll discuss top-down and bottom-up listening. We'll go through the stages in teaching listening, and I'll show you how a listening lesson may be structured, and we'll also make some conclusions for Interclass. Let's start with the scheme provided by Scrivener in his book Learning Teaching. And you remember that we teach language systems and we teach language skills. Language systems is what we know about a language, and language skill is what we can do with the language. So listening is a receptive skill together with reading, and there are also 2 productive skills, speaking and writing. We also have to remember that a skill is formed through the knowledge. So at first we go at the knowledge stage, and then with practices, with some practice, it turns into the skill level. So listening is a receptive skill. And what can we tell about this skill? We can tell that students receive information through listening. So we probably need to teach them how the words sound, and we also need to understand if they understand. So we start with pictures, translation, and all the simple techniques to make our students understand words. And later we go to we do different types of listening. And now we'll look at these types. There are 3 main types of listening, which are monitoring. When you monitor, you just pick up some very important details for you, and you don't listen to every word. When you listen for gist, it's already a more profound listening when you need to learn more from the listening. However, you don't catch every word or every nuance. So you catch the gist, you catch the main information. In monitoring, you pick up only the facts you need. In listening for gist, you catch the information about the whole piece, but only the main information. And intensive listening, or listening for details, or detailed listening, there are many terms for this, is about picking up every detail of what you hear. This type of listening is usually very popular at exams, and also when we listen to the lectures, we can listen intensively. So when, again, monitoring, picking up the important information, listening for gist is when you get the general understanding of what you listen to, and intensive listening is when you listen to every detail, when every detail is important. How can we listen in general? So these were the types of listening, and Now, let's look at how we may hear the information and understand it, because you remember that it's important not only to listen to, but also to understand. There are two listening processes, and these processes are very important for us as language teachers. The process number one, I would even change the places here. So bottom up, it's when we start from the very simple, from the very simple stage. We start listening to words first, then words become phrases, then phrases become sentences, and sentences later become texts. So this is bottom-up listening. When you hear, then you start listening, then comprehension, and then you may react. In top-down listening, we go different way. We go from the top to the very down. And here in top-down listening, it's very important to have background knowledge. Remember, we talked about the students and the importance of the background knowledge. Same is here. When we go top down, it's important to predict. So we start with our general understanding about the world, how the text or the tasks for the text are structured. So if we know that this text will be about endangered species, probably we'll remember something about the species, and it will be very important to look for the signs, for signposts, and only then we'll be able to listen for gist, like first listening is when you get the general idea, and then at the second listening, we'll listen for detail, or it is intensive listening. So let's look at the theory once again. We may either listen bottom up, using this bottom-up approach. So, and it's like listening to every word and then combining them into a text. Or we may use our knowledge of the world and then listen top-down. So we can go from the what we know about the world, then we recognize some important ideas, then we'll add our background, and even in this case, we'll need to listen to the text twice. So once for gist, and the other time is for intensive listening for details. So there are different strategies for bottom-up listening and for top-down listening. When it's bottom-up listening, it is important to recognize the words, the clauses, so then the utterances, keywords, and as you probably understand, this type of listening is much better for beginner students. So when we do top-down listening, we identify the topic, identify the speaker, we make a prediction, we remember some vocabulary, and we stay focused and take notes. Probably here you'll make a conclusion that this type of listening is for more advanced learners. So how this was the general information about how we listen and types of listening, but what are the stages in teaching listening? The stages in teaching listening are very close to the bottom-up approach. We start with forming perceptual understanding. Students learn to recognize a word, then a phrase, they repeat, listen and repeat. And here we may check their understanding by the pictures or by translation if you know the language one of your students. I would like to point to the specific importance of teachers' speech at this time, peers' speech, because students need to start recognizing foreign words, the words of a foreign language. So here they listen to a teacher, and classroom English is very important. They listen to their peers, they listen to the recordings, and that is how at the first stage we form the perceptual understanding. At the second stage, the audio memory is formed, and at this stage, already not the words, but pieces of text may be repeated, and we check the understanding of our students by choosing a correct picture, and also we may check their understanding by the questions. At the third stage, starting, it may be difficult for beginners, but for advanced learners, it's okay. We form conceptual understanding and the ability to follow text meaning. So, and at this stage, students process the arguments, and we already can check their understanding by asking questions and by doing tests. So, what happens at the higher levels when we teach listening, when it's a listening lesson? We see that we start with lead-in or introduction stage, and it is obviously, this lesson is obviously a top-down approach lesson. Our students look at the pictures, they try to predict what the text will be about. So that's how we activate their schematics. We activate the background knowledge. Then they listen for the first time, and this is listening for gist. Then they listen for the second time, and this is scanning or listening for detail. Then they answer the questions, and as listening is a receptive skill, and we form the skills that have to be productive as well, it is recommended to follow the listening stage and the stage of checking up understanding with productive follow-up. When the students review the content, go through the content, and produce something, they may either produce their own story, or they produce arguments or dialogue, anything, and the stage is followed with content feedback and language feedback if possible. So you see that the typical listening lesson structure, so here I put it into the structure, is a lead-in with the prediction, the vocabulary pre-teaching, you unblock the words, then you listen for gist, and it's good to anchor while students are listening, to show them, to pay their attention to some details, to make them focused. So then you listen for specific information, and finally, for the third time, you may listen for detail. However, you may shorten this listening to just 2 stages. When you predict, when you unblock the vocabulary, and then you listen for gist and you listen for details. It is again recommended to follow a listening lesson with the speaking. So, and students may respond to the text, may personalize it, or just practice speaking for fluency. And here the stage will be followed with content and language feedback. So this typical lesson structure is good at the advanced levels. And now let's make some conclusions about how we teach listening and why. So first of all, listening is a skill. So we teach it by practicing. We can listen to very small details. It's monitoring. We can listen to understand the whole idea of the text. It's listening for gist. Or we can listen to understand every single word, or mainly the text mainly. So it's listening for detail or intensive listening. When we teach listening, we go top down or bottom up. If we go bottom up, it means that we start with sounds, words, and go up. If we go top down, we usually do it with activating schemata or background knowledge. Bottom-up approach is best at the beginner levels, while top-down listening is better for advanced learners. And that is at the same time, we remember that there are stages for teaching listening, and at the advanced stage, the listening lesson, like we usually don't have listening lessons at the beginner stages, but at the advanced stage, the listening lesson will have this type of a structure with lead-in, pre-teaching vocabulary, listening for gist, listening for detail, and productive follow-up. So it all shows us that how we need to develop listening and why it is important. Because while our students listen, they are still at this passive type of learning. But if we do a productive follow-up, we go to the active stage of learning. And for now, some conclusions for Interclass. Listening is the important part of every class. Teacher's language, peer language, classroom English, everything is focused on developing students' listening skill, because it's a very important skill. So as we use categories and maps to organize our students' knowledge, we usually use listening to promote knowledge of vocabulary at the lower levels. Then listening is based on the maps and reading at the intermediate levels. And that is how the productive follow-up is formed. It is usually reading, listening, map, and speech production. Like we try to combine all this important pieces of learning, because that is how the topic is much better learned, and our students have this whole picture of the topic. We don't listen to anything that is not that doesn't coincide with the topic, and using transformations and CCQs for checking students' understanding is advisable I advise you to do it from the very beginning. Is it big or small at first, and then go further, further, and further. Because CCQs, they help with transformations at the advanced levels, and they really help to check students' understanding in a more profound way. So, thank you for your attention, and in our next video, we will be talking about teaching reading. Goodbye.